In this video, we will discuss basic lens terminology, including field of view, working distance, focal length, aperture, depth of field, and exposure. Field of view. The field of view is the total area in which a dataman can read barcodes. This area may need to accommodate a range of barcode sizes, but at a minimum, the field of view must fully encompass the largest code on a known range of package sizes. A dataman reader will capture images and use proprietary software to only decode barcodes that are within its field of view. Working distance. The working distance is the linear distance measured from the front of the lens to the face of the object being inspected. The working distance changes when a dataman reader is physically moved, and as a result, the reader's field of view will change as well. Think of the relationship between the field of view and the working distance of a dataman reader as a pyramid that's apex expands out of the lens to the scanning area of the dataman. The perpendicular height of the pyramid represents the working distance, and the area of the pyramid's base represents the field of view. The working distance is based on the size of the field of view required to capture the full area where barcodes will be present. This establishes the minimum and maximum distances the dataman reader can be mounted to view and read a barcode on the specified range of package sizes. The distance from the lens to the smallest package is the maximum working distance. The distance from the lens to the face of the largest package is the dataman's minimum working distance. It is important to consider the working distance during reader setup because if it changes, almost everything else will be impacted, like the field of view, depth of field, lighting, and potentially other dataman reader parameters. Focal length. Focal length of a lens is the distance between a lens focal midpoint and the imaging sensor in a dataman reader. The focal length determines the lens angle of view. The angle of view is how much a lens bends the light that passes through it to optimize focus. In the pyramid analogy, this is the angle that the sides meet at the pyramid's apex. The angle of view affects how much the dataman reader's field of view will increase or decrease in size as it moves farther away from the reader. The focal length also determines how much a subject will be magnified given its position from the lens. A shorter focal length creates a wider angle of view, allowing for more of the barcode to fit inside the reader's field of view. Using a lens with a larger focal length narrows the lens's angle of view, limiting the field of view and magnifying the details seen within the scan area. This means that the lens with a shorter focal length requires a shorter working distance than the one with a longer focal length. Notice that though these images appear similar, they vary because the image that was captured with the shorter focal length has more perspective distortion. This causes the light to fall off at the edges, and the subject to seem more round as if we applied a fisheye filter to the image. Typically, the shortest focal length recommended to use with dataman products is an 8mm lens and the largest is a 35mm lens. Aperture. The aperture is the size of the physical opening of the camera lens that affects the amount of light to the image sensor. The aperture is similar to the pupil and iris of a human eye. As the iris expands and contracts, the pupil, or opening, also gets larger or smaller to allow or restrict light into the eye. The aperture's version of an iris, known as the diaphragm, expands and contracts to control the amount of light into the image sensor in the dataman reader. On a lens, f-numbers, also known as f-stops, refer to the aperture size. The larger the f-number, the more the diaphragm covers the lens, restricting how much light can get in. Here are some examples. Notice less is in focus when the aperture is set to f2. On the opposite end, notice the grainy image quality when the aperture is set to f22. The aperture settings need to have the right balance for proper image quality. Dataman readers love the dark due to the sharper image quality and less edge distortion. Unless you have a specific use case, the f-stop should be between f5.6 and f11. The aperture directly affects depth of field and exposure. Depth of field. The depth of field is the total in-focus view of a reader. It is affected by the lens selection, working distance, aperture settings, and more. The smaller the focal length of the lens, the larger the field of view is. The smaller the aperture f number is, the less depth of field is captured. In this example, we use barcodes to test the depth of field. If an aperture's f-stop is set too low, the depth of field will be too shallow to read the entire barcode. This creates poor DataMan reader results. To fix this, use a higher f-stop to lengthen the depth of field and read the entire barcode on the box. Exposure. Exposure refers to how long a reader takes to capture a picture. Aperture manages the amount of light, while exposure defines the amount of time light is allowed into the image sensor. In other words, exposure relates to time and aperture relates to physical area. Image brightness can be changed with either exposure or aperture size. Exposure is a balancing act. A long exposure time results in a bright image and potentially motion blur. A short exposure time creates a darker image, usually with no noticeable motion blur. Exposure is adjusted using the DataMan setup tool. Remember, the DataMan readers love the dark. Exposure should be set to the shortest amount of time possible for better read results, as well as more total reads. Keep in mind, these settings are solution dependent and may require settings outside common variables, which you can find in our installation and troubleshooting guides. Let's recap. The field of view is everything the DataMan can see. The working distance is the distance from the DataMan that barcodes can be read. The focal length determines how wide or narrow the angle of view is. The aperture controls the volume of light into the DataMan. The depth of field is the area that is in focus. Exposure is the amount of time light is allowed onto the image sensor. DataMan readers love the dark.